we have been stating that any actions or behaviors that didn't conform to sort of a heteropatriarchal normative and specific gender roles were shamed. They were seen as barbaric and uncivilized. We see this from the archives and missionaries' archives, explorers writing back to their countries, the shock that they felt, not only when they saw women in leadership positions, but when they saw genders stepping outside their restrictive lens of what they're supposed to be doing. And so we see this shame being pushed upon the Indigenous peoples back then. But I think, as Kim pointed out, there in her culture, there's the wink tag, right? And we use the word genderful or two-spirit somehow to describe this. But every Indigenous language has their own term for describing these really specially important people. And yes, they did have ceremony. And I think maybe some tribes, they shamed it out of them. But I think that knowledge has stayed really strong in many cultures. And so we still are looking at those words. We're turning back to our languages and going, wow, we have these words that are embedded right inside that. And that means that they were important to us. So, yeah. Kim, what do you think about that?
I have so much to say. I don't know where to start. I do think, and I was thinking about the film clip that Billy Ray Belcourt had as well in this week, in this module, right? And I just watched that this morning for the first time, and that it was also making me think a lot about the tension between what our ancestors knew and what was disrupted by settlers and shamed and oppressed viciously, and what it is possible to quote unquote recover. And I think a lot about this because I do think we have both a lot of knowledge and ethical ways of being still embedded in the way that we relate with one another, maybe as extended families, or, that story I told about not shaming somebody for being quote unquote disabled, but finding what's special about them, and the same thing for gender nonconforming people. Yeah. So I do still think we have these baseline ethical ways of being if we don't necessarily have all the words, if we don't necessarily have all the knowledge, right? Because those things were so viciously suppressed by residential schools, by many of the institutions we have to engage with. So I think there's a role for language learning in this, although I've talked to young Dakota women and Two-Spirit people who are doing a language learning group who said, we need to have language learning groups about sexuality and sexual practices, because some of our elders who know the languages best are also products of residential schools, right? Or aren't necessarily comfortable talking about sexuality openly. So this is a real predicament for us. And it may be where we have to do what Billy Ray says. If we've lost some of that language because of the shame, we may need to go back to those baseline ethical ways of being, and we need to invent new language. We may need to do that, right? We may need to come out of those core values and say, what are the ways in which we inhabit gender today? Because we don't live in 1850, right? We don't live in 1740. We live now with all of these institutions, and we are going to have to figure out how to manifest these core values of people in this world, right? And we can't simply return